So welcome to Module 1 of our Principles of Essential Nutrition. So I want to give thanks first of all to the work of Dr. George Goodhart. George was the founder of Applied Kinesiology. He died in 2008, or his journey continues, as we say. George was a very good second-generation chiropractor from Detroit in the United States. So his father was a chiropractor as well, and George pioneered the concept of using muscle testing to evaluate functional systems in the brain. So I just got a little film clip quickly to show you, first of all, of George, which I filmed about 10 years ago now.
This is a great opportunity for me to be looking Chris Smith right in the eye. Chris Smith is a fine member of our organization, but I know you'll welcome him, and Chris will give you the best there is because that's what he is. Thank you very much.
Okay, so always in the news there's lots of articles about what's good and what's bad for you, and I always like when there's something at least that's good for you, is that many organic yogurts have a higher sugar content than non-organic yogurts. If you switch to Diet Coke in a bid to cut down on sugar, then you might want to reevaluate just how healthy your choices are, because scientists now claim that sweeteners found in Diet Coke and other soft drinks could damage your gut bacteria. According to scientists from universities in Israel and Singapore, 6 common artificial sweeteners, aspartame, etc., have all been found to be toxic to gut bacteria. That's interesting, isn't it? On there. So in a lab trial, all 6 of the sweeteners were exposed to bacteria that were commonly found in the gut. And these bacteria were then genetically modified to contain fluorescent compounds which glow when they detect toxins. The scientists found that the toxins were released when gut bacteria were exposed to each artificial sweetener, and it only took 1 milligram per mil of the artificial sweetener to turn the bacteria toxic. They've been associated with weight gain, slashing the chances of getting pregnant during IVF, tripling the risk of deadly stroke and dementia, and raising the risk of developing diabetes. Just 1 milligram per mil of artificial sweeteners found to be toxic. Diet Coke contains 180 milligrams. So interesting, isn't it? There's one other thing to add to the potentially toxic effects that could destroy our gut microbe, along with food preservers and antibiotics and chlorine, etc. And then, of course, you get the artificial sweeteners toxicity on the gut microbes is not reflected in real life, which is the reply, of course, from the industry side, okay, who say the trial wasn't long enough and didn't do the right tests and things. So in the end, the poor viewer who watches these things or listens to them doesn't know which one to actually believe. And this is continually in the news because the news thrives on highlights of bad news, usually not on good news. It usually tells you how bad things are rather than saying, well, actually, it's better to have sugar than the artificial sweetener in the end. This was another interesting one in the Daily Mail recently. Stunning anti-aging breakthroughs could see humans live to 150 and regenerate organs by 2020 for the price of a cup of coffee a day. This sounds really interesting, doesn't it? And then the science behind the new technique involves the molecule nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, or NAD, which plays a role in generating energy in the human body. And we're going to be covering that in Module 2 later on this weekend. And that's what you could become. And then we'll see a picture afterwards later on of what you become if you take the NAD. Okay, so starting right at the beginning as an introduction to functional biochemistry and essential nutrition, we want to know really what the cause of disease is. And I use as my Bible Harper's Biochemistry principally for this course, but I also take references from lots and lots of other books and texts, and each reference will be on the bottom of each slide in your worksheet manual there. So this is taken from Harper's as the major cause of disease, and it's a very good model to work on regardless of what the patient comes in, on the assumption the patient hasn't come in with an acute trauma. And even if they have had an acute trauma, they may need some nutrition to help the healing process and the regeneration process. But we're really looking at chronic disorders and how to come across them. So Harper's puts down physical agents such as mechanical trauma. In other words, you lifted something too heavy and you damaged yourself. Extremes of temperature, sudden shock in atmospheric pressure. He not being a person, but it's a group of people, put radiation there Personally, we put radiation more as the sort of under toxins here, and electric shock. So those will be the physical agents. And then he puts in chemical agents, which include drugs, which would be certain toxic compounds, and therapeutic drugs. Okay, we would probably put in there also. We would add in toxins from the environment, which could be within our foods, etc., and the environment of things that we inhale, and things like pesticides, herbicides, and so on, which could be on the foods, and also naturally occurring toxins, which can occur inside foods, which can be difficult to detoxify for some people, such as solanines in the deadly nightshade fungi. Then we've got number 3, he puts down as biological agents, in other words, viruses, bacteria, fungi, and higher forms of parasites, although I would also put in lower forms of parasites because many protozoa and sporozoa are pathogenic to the body. And then number 4 is oxygen lack or hypoxia, which we give great credence to, which means a loss of blood supply or depletion of oxygen carrying capacity of the blood, which in fact poisons the oxidative enzymes and stimulates the production of more free radicals or reactive oxygen species. So hypoxia itself actually generates the reactive oxygen species pathway, which leads to inflammation. Genetic disorders, these could be congenital, molecular. I would actually put that, in sequence as number 1. There's no mention of the mind here or emotions as being etiology, which is interesting because, of course, it comes from a biochemistry textbook. So everything is biochemistry. So as this is a biochemistry course and nutrition, we're not going to get too involved with the emotions ourselves. But I wanted to just put that in to emphasize the fact that emotions, of course, are a big cause of illness, but he makes no mention of those at the beginning. So we've talked about accessing the 4 minds, the left and the right brain dominance, the superconscious above, and most important for us today and over this weekend is the subconscious mind, of when we access our database by looking down. We can also access the subconscious mind by therapy localizing the right to the left amygdala on the greater wings of the sphenoid, and vice versa, the left to the right. And usually the left to the right goes weak, but sometimes it's the right to the left. And then we go around the beginning and ending points of the meridians, and we find out which meridian negates that. And once we found what that meridian is, we can then check the muscles associated with that, and you can then use that weak muscle to find the nutrients or the remedy that the person needs. So life and health. So health is something which is not exactly the same as fitness. You can be fit but not necessarily healthy, and you can be healthy and not that fit. Athletes are good examples of this, that not all athletes are healthy because they pick up a lot of infections and things, but they can be fit, and you can get fit people who are not necessarily healthy. So life and health are dependent upon adequate nutrient intake. Okay, so that's fairly straightforward for us. And this adequate nutrient intake are divided into the key components. Perhaps there's about 36 to 40 of these different compounds and nutrients that the body needs to optimize health and physiology in every way. So first of all, we eat proteins, which are made of building blocks called amino acids. And these alpha amino acids, which you obtain from our diet, come together as small groups and lock together, and these small chains are called peptides. And then when several peptides come together, they're called polypeptides, in other words, chains of peptides, which eventually become the end product, which is a protein. And some proteins are short lengths of amino acids, perhaps 3 or 4, simple ones like that, or you can have complex proteins like glycine, which can be several thousand amino acids long, so they vary in their size. But basically all proteins are made of the 20 amino acids which build the protein combinations. So the L-alpha amino acids and their derivatives build proteins. They make neurotransmitters. They biosynthesis of porphyrins, which are in-between substances in making heme. The purines, which make up our DNA, and the pyrimidines, and urea, which is derived from arginine. Peptides also, these are small groups, remember, of amino acids form hormones, hormone-releasing factors, neuromodulators, and different neurotransmitters. So proteins build tissues in the body. They transport molecules, so a lot of foods, a lot of nutrients, a lot of hormones are carried by different proteins, particularly globulin and albumin. They form antibodies for our immune system, and they form enzymes. Now, all enzymes in the body are proteins, and all proteins, as we see, are expressions of the gene. But not all genes encode for proteins. So in other words, all enzymes are proteins, but not all proteins are enzymes. Okay, they're about 5 to 1 at least. So enzymes are proteins, and therefore they're expressions of the genes. Proteins are physically and functionally complex molecules that perform multiple critical roles. They're biologically important organic compounds. They're composed of an amine group at one end, in other words, an NH2 at one end, and a carboxylic or a COOH at the other end, along with side chains of specific individual amino acids. The key elements of an amino acid are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So here we see again the NH2 at one end here, with a positive on here, and a carboxyl group at the other one with a negative, which allows one to link to the next. So the positive links to the negative. So we'll find the amino group here will link to the carboxyl of the next one along, forming the protein. So this will form the variation in each individual amino acid, along with the length of the carbon chain. So here we see the different essential amino acids as they are formed here. Essential means you have to get them from your diet, that you can't make these. The non-essential amino acids can be made from the 8 essential amino acids. And then on the right here, we've got some amino acid derivatives, which we're going to talk about from time to time, particularly in the protein module. So we've got citrulline, which is part of the urea cycle, and ornithine, very important amino acids with the recycling of ammonia. We've got taurine, which is one of the biggest detoxifiers that the body has and conjugates with bile, and beta-alanine. So these are derivatives, so they don't build proteins, but they are technically amino acids. Some amino acids have a positive charge on them, like lysine and arginine, and glutamic acid and negative charges on them. Now, an amino acid, if it has a neutral charge, will form a straight line. So you have amino acid in a linear pattern to another one, to another one. And as soon as you get one into the charge, it changes its shape. So instead of being straight, if there's an amino acid here, like aspartame here or glutamic acid, it'll change its shape. And then you get a lysine and it changes. So proteins are three-dimensional. They're not linear structures. They're three-dimensional. So we've got a situation where we've got a conformation, as it's called, or a change of shape to each individual protein. Now, if something locks on, in other words, what we call a signal, as we'll see, or a ligand, binds on to that positive or that negative charge, it then loses the charge and it changes its shape. So proteins actually move or change their conformation. So proteins are living structures that actually change their shape. Okay, so that is what gives them their life or their activity. So both D amino acids and non-alpha amino acids occur in nature, but only the L form of an amino acid is present in proteins in the human body. So here we see a typical example of proteins in the cell membranes. So they form receptor sites, amongst many other functions, which enable extracellular signals and nutrients to get inside the cell through the receptor sites. So here we talk about protein conformation. So conformation A changing to conformation B when something attaches to the receptor site on the protein. So comparing a human cadaver to a living human is not accurate because it doesn't move when it's in a dead state. So life is actually movement, and this comes from The Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. So here we see protein hexokinase as an example here, and then we lock on a ligand or binding substance, and you see then that the molecule actually changes its shape. And the most interesting of these is, of course, the digestive enzymes themselves, which actually crush the carbohydrates and the proteins in the process of digestion. So it's a physical form. It's not just a chemical reaction. It actually crushes and breaks open the components of the carbohydrates and the fats and things. So this is how lipase works and amylase works and protease works. So again, here we see one in a resting conformation, and here we see the active part with it moving. So what makes a protein change its shape is called a signal. In other words, this could be a molecule that attaches to the positive or negative charge, or it could be other things. So it could be a signal which is not necessarily a good signal. It could be a drug that attaches there. It could be a hormone, a growth factor, etc. Or it could even affect with light or energy, such as light, and particularly electromagnetic effects. So electromagnetic effects of radiation have been shown to change the conformation in proteins. Sound can do it as well. These are all sources of energy, basically. And thoughts. So thoughts can change our conformation of our protein. If you have a lot of stress, you know you don't digest your food so well. And if you're very happy and relaxed when you're having a meal, your digestion process is much better. So positive and negative charges are created also by positive and negative thought processes. So the proteins themselves had little clefts in their surfaces for these signals to attach, rather like baseballs collecting. The baseball glove collects the baseball and changes the signal and the conformation. So the movement can be used to drive work itself with the change of the protein there. In other words, a digestive enzyme can crush a food particle, as we've talked about there. So genes, which make up our biological individuality, provide the blueprint of the protein. But the life of the protein is determined by the signal. So the signal is all important to what the protein does during our life. Thus, there's two parts to the life, the physical part of the protein and the signal. And behavior is thus dependent upon the proteins and the signals. Disease, therefore, is a defect in the behavior of the proteins and the signals to work together. So about 5%, Bruce Lipton quotes, is due to defects in the protein from birth defects. And for that, I would say probably that includes inherited polymorphisms from our parents. So about 5% perhaps have a true genetic background, where 95% are due to defects in the signal. In other words, they're acquired problems during our lifetime from the beginning, in other words, from conception up to where we are now. But the genetic part increases as we age. So our genes fail to express themselves because we accumulate various poisons and inhibiting factors and maybe nutritional deficiencies. So our genes fail to work as well, so we don't repair and regenerate as we get older. So fatty acids, these are substances, again, which we have to get from our diet, and they form all our cell membranes, not just the outside of the cell, but all around each organelle in the cell and around the nucleus of the cell, all contain these fatty cell membranes. They're sources of energy, they're stores of energy, they protect our organs, particularly organs like the kidneys, etc. They act as electrical and thermal insulators, keep us warm and cool in the summer, build steroid hormones. So some steroid hormones are built from all steroid hormones are built from cholesterol, which is a fatty acid. Carbohydrates, which we get from our diet, again, are sources of energy. They link with amino acids to form glycoproteins, and they can link with fatty acids to form glycolipids, both of which we'll talk about in future modules. And then what we're going to be spending the next module on are vitamins, or vital amines. And these vitamins act as coenzymes in many cases. So a coenzyme is something that links with an enzymatic pathway and becomes part of it and donates a particular group, like a hydrogen group or a phosphate group. They act as antioxidants, so things like vitamin A and vitamin E, as we'll see, are powerful antioxidants. They're involved with blood clotting, like vitamin K, and again, they form part of cell membranes, like phosphatidylinositol and phosphatidylcholine are all parts of the vitamin complexes. Now, those vitamins which act as coenzymes, in other words, they become and participate in biochemical equations, are mostly the activated vitamin Bs. Okay? There's 4, as we'll see, non-vitamin Bs, but when we talk about a coenzyme, 16 of the 20 of these are vitamin Bs. So we first of all we start with B1, as we'll spend time tomorrow in the next module. Thiamine pyrophosphate and thiamine triphosphate. And then we have the B2 flavin coenzymes, and then the B3, the nicotinamide coenzymes. B5 is the coenzyme A coenzymes. B6 is pyridoxal 5-phosphate, biotin, and the folates here. So on the right here, we've got basically one of the major functions that each one does. Now the second group here is the B12 coenzymes, which is adenosylcobalamin and methylcobalamin and tetrahydrobiopterin. And then the non-vitamin B ones are vitamin C, S-adenosylmethionine or SAM, alpha-lipoic acid and CoQ10. So those four are not vitamin Bs, but they act as coenzymes. In other words, they denote something to the biochemical equation here.